We're never quite sure where Gary's going with some of his stories, so it's really good. It's definitely entertaining. So
we want to prepare you. So all
right, I'll start off by, hopefully most of you know who the Ark of Ohio is, but Gary calls us the grandmother of the movement.
See, my story.
So it relates. I got you, man. So we've been around since 1950. We're the voice for people with disabilities and their families. So we spend a lot of time advocating. What does that mean? It means we spend a lot of time at the State House. We do a lot of local parent support groups. The old model we had where the goal was to have an ARC chapter in every county really was not sustainable. I think at our height, maybe we had 25 chapters.
Actually over 60.
60, okay.
Yeah, that was in the
good history lesson.
Well, if
okay,
you
hey, hang on. You'll get your...
Our wives tell us we're like work husbands, work wives, I don't know.
All right, so the ARC is the grassroots movement, shaped the system. You know, county boards started out as county board schools. They came around in 1967. So the ARC parents are responsible and did all that hard work to lay the groundwork for what we have today, but we have to push on and make positive changes also. We have to recognize all that work and then push forward and do good things for people. Okay? You don't have to.
Okay. So first of all, it's like, okay, they talked all day about talking to my legislators. I have no idea who my legislators are. So we're going to give you a brief civics lesson. So everyone in this room has a state representative and a state senator. And everyone in this room has a House of Congress member in Washington, in the House of Representatives, and we have 2 senators in Washington. But we're talking today about the state legislature, and the people coming to the reception are state legislators, state representatives, and state senators. Oh, okay. Anyone want to volunteer your address? If you don't know, okay, Becky.
Street, sure, 6332.
Can you do that? So you go to this website, www.legislature.ohio.gov. So he's going to try to put in Becky's address. Oh, there you are.
6332. 6332. 6. Peck, P as a Paul, E-C-K, Road, Ravenna, 44266.
And it pops up who your state representative and state senator are. So if any of you in the room need to know, this is how you go about doing it, finding who they are. So someone said earlier in the day, I'm contacting them all the time, I never get a response. Every one of them has a local office. Everyone has an office here. If they're a senator, their office is in the State House. If they're a House of Representatives member, their office is in the Rife Center, which is a tall building on the other side. So those of you who went on the State House tour, the Senate offices are on one side of the State House. Once upon a time, the House members were on the other, but we've outgrown that since the 1860s. But still, and we had people the other day do it, you can, once you get through security, you can actually ask the guard where my state senator's office is, and you can walk in the door. You know, The term lobbyist came about by people actually going and sitting in a lobby and waiting till their representative came out. So it's best though to make an appointment. And you don't have to always make it here in Columbus. John here reminded me, what did you say, John?
Meet them at the fairgrounds.
Meet them where they're at. Go to the county fairs. They're always showing up. Go to the fish fries in Lent. They're there. Go where they are. Take your phone and your camera with you. They need pictures of them with their constituents and get to know them. What I said earlier is we as families don't often tell people we have a need and a child with a disability. And we as independents and agencies don't know where the money comes from. We think it comes locally, which sometimes it does, but most of the funding for waiver services and all of the funding for intermediate care facilities comes from the state treasury and the federal government. 60% of our waiver and ICF funding comes from Washington. So if your kids are in an intermediate care facility, there's no county money in that program. It's state and federal. The way waivers work and the way ICFs work is that it's a state-federal partnership where the federal government's putting in 60% of the cost. There are rules and regulations on how that money can be spent, but the state determines the rate of pay. So the amount of money that you all get paid as providers is not determined in Washington, and it's not determined at your county board. It's determined by the funding we receive from our state legislature in a bill. The current bill is called Bill 30.
House Bill 33.
House Bill 33. So, can you go?
Can we do that
Yes.
after I talk about a few?
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to cover, and we'll have time for questions. We'll get you, okay? I want to talk about a few talking points when you go to the State House and you meet with representatives or senators. Be yourself. Just tell your story and talk about the things that you know, right? I won't fall off the stage.
I'll catch you.
Okay.
Sure.
I'm here for you.
So tell your story. I think the saying I like to say is don't get too far out over your skis. Have you ever heard that expression? If you don't know something, there's nothing wrong with saying you don't know that when you'll try to get back to them with the answer, okay? Relax. It's okay. As Gary said earlier, they're just like us. They put their pants on the same way. It's okay. Relax. Tell your story. It can be nerve-wracking when you're up there, especially when you're testifying when developmental centers were closing, like I got to do on my very first testimony, which was very, very controversial. Don't assume that the person you're meeting with understands the issues. So try to have what I'll call a primer question, right? So I'm gonna read one off here to you. So, example, are you familiar with the DSP crisis and how the state sets the Medicaid reimbursement rates? Okay, and give them time to answer that. And it's kind of like a primer question for you to then be able to get in there and start telling them about how the state sets those rates and how in our field is unique in that providers, those rates are set, right? No other business out there is like that. So the state sets the rate, and that is what providers get paid, okay? Take the time to meet with them more than just one time. If you come down here, and I know it's hard for families, and I know it's hard for all of us, but you have to try to build that relationship with your representative.
So find out what church,
Yes.
mosque, or synagogue they go to happen to sit in the pew next to them. I mean, my grandma would have done that. And she would have invited them over for dinner. You might have to invite them to Denny's. But we're doing this cocktail reception because coffee and donuts don't work anymore. You know?
It works for some of us.
It works for some, you know, the donuts maybe. But
We have a lot of conversations about donuts and bakeries across the state.
I weighed 135 when I started this job.
Marysville.
Yes.
Okay.
So find out find out their haunts. 1 in 7 Americans has a family member or a relationship with someone who has a disability. You already have something in common with them. And they're going to be just like us. That's not the first thing they're going to say. But when you tell them about your loved one, people with disabilities, tell them about your story, they will begin to relate. If there's a bridge out and I can't get to work, I'm telling them about the bridge. Tell them about your loved ones. We have to. You know, we can't be silent anymore and just do it. We have to tell them, because when you're not telling them just for your loved one, you're telling them for the other 300,000 Ohioans that are affected by developmental disabilities. 300,000. Our county boards and the state currently serve 100,000 people with levy dollars and waivers. There are over 150,000 children in our special education programs, and the rest, thank goodness, blend into society. But 300,000 Ohioans, and they've all got families for the most part. And we don't say anything because we take care of our own. Thank you very much. Well, we need help.
I'm laughing because I always try to time this, and I wait for him to kind of take a breath for a second.
I have no plate to pass today,
So
but
I want to just, another quick point. When you're talking about going into the State House and advocating or meeting with representatives outside of the State House, right? You can meet them at a coffee shop. You can set those meetings up. Always understand you're there to advocate for your loved one and those services, but you have to also understand there's oftentimes competing organizations and other people asking for funding too that might not align with what we are asking for. So you have to be prepared to have an answer for maybe some of those questions. And again, if you don't have the answer, tell them, you'll find out, you'll get back to them.
So let's take a break. We had a couple questions.
We need a mic.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
You said the federal funding is 60% of the cost.
Right.
What is the state?
40.
40.
So our intermediate care facilities are about, the percentages, the percentages change based on the economy. It's about 60% federal, 40% state if you have a loved one in what's called an intermediate care facility.
And that's only for ICS?
Yes.
Yeah.
But if I'm on a waiver, it's still 60-40. But in some cases, the county is paying the 40% match. And in some cases, the state of Ohio is paying the 40% match.
Can I give a couple details on that? So typically, the county board provides the 40% match money from local funds raised in those counties, right? Sometimes, to balance out how waivers are distributed across Ohio, because remember, Ohio has an agreement with CMS, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. So that's the agreement, and there has to be some state-wideness to it. So sometimes during a budget cycle, or sometimes during a lawsuit, like we had one a couple years back from DRO, the state will put out what are called state-funded waivers. So sometimes that's hard to navigate, but 90% of the time, the 40% matches from counties.
But where we're getting,
90% of the time, 40% matches from
Right.
Yeah.
So don't worry so
Yeah,
much about the
just-
percentages. Just know that there are waivers have to be statewide, which means theoretically everyone in the state of Ohio has the same access to waivers. The reality is we know some counties, the waiting list moves slower than others.
Right.
Some counties don't have local levy dollars. What we need in this budget is the state to ante up. Because the counties themselves don't have, the ask is $750 million more dollars. We're asked, that 50% increase is going to require $750 million from the state treasury to draw down federal money.
So they have to have that money, and then in order to draw down that 64% is what it's currently at, because I'm all about those numbers.
Yeah.
60-40 is a good split, but so they have to have that funding, and they have to have the agreements from the counties, and then they got to pull that federal match money down.
But don't try to explain the funding
Yeah,
formula
yeah.
to the legislature. They will not understand it. If I'm on, have you ever heard of the home care waiver or the passport waiver? Those have no county money in them. We're the developmental disabilities is blessed in that we have county board of DD levy dollars. Those are the funds that we have used in the last 20 years to draw down that 60%. If I'm a senior citizen on the passport waiver, or I have medical challenges and I'm on the home care waiver, the 40% is always paid by the state of Ohio. So it gets confusing for legislators often. So I wouldn't even go into the 60-40. It's really pretty just.
I think that discussion is more for when we're talking about how services, we're not necessarily talking about that to the legislature, because again, our system is very complex. We have 3 what we call DD waivers, the level 1, the self, the IO waiver, and you get those through the local county board of DD, and then you have the passport and home care waiver, which you go to your local JFS office.
Or the agent office.
Or the agent office.
Let's
Thank
get
you.
another question.
Yeah, that's what I was asking about it coming through DODD, because when I was asking for additional HPC and they were saying, they were denying me, and I said, well, what happens to the funding she's entitled to that she's not using? Well, it just goes back into the system to others. Why can't
It
she
really doesn't.
maximize what
It doesn't work that way. You don't get the 60% unless you provide the 40%. So if you don't use the service, it's not drawn down from Washington. So it doesn't go into another pot. The other thing,
So why
and
are they unwilling to give me what she's entitled to?
that's a whole other day, but there are questions. So I know there are people here from Cuyahoga County, and they'll come to me and say, well, Cuyahoga County and Franklin County have hundreds of millions of dollars set aside. They do. Every time you go in and ask for a waiver, I have a tremor. If your superintendent starts trembling, it's because if you get on a DD waiver, it's a lifelong commitment to support the person on the waiver. You don't have a right or an entitlement to a waiver, but once you're in the door, you have a federal entitlement, because they're putting in 60%, to all waiver services as long as that waiver exists and as long as you qualify for. So for most of our loved ones, it's a lifelong commitment. So the counties have to have a reserve fund. They have to maintain services for our loved ones into the future. So if I have a waiver and David doesn't have a waiver, we're exactly the same disability, we're the same age. He's actually 11 years younger, but I don't look it. So if it's the same disability, I have a waiver, he doesn't have a waiver. His services are funded 100% by local levy dollars, and the levy fails, and the levy fails, and the levy fails. He can be told to stay home because we don't have any local money. I got a waiver. I've got a federal entitlement to services. And if there is no money locally, then the state has to come up with the funding, because the contract is between the state of Ohio and Washington, not between Franklin and Cuyahoga and Washington.
So you all,
Why are they not allowing her?
Pardon me?
So again, why aren't they allowing her to use the full amount?
File for a due process hearing. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Well, my question is, because I knew this happened to someone recently, they moved from one county to another, and our Logan County Board of DD denied their waiver and said, we're not doing that here. If you want the services you were getting there, you gotta move back here.
File a due process hearing. So anytime that you have Medicaid or you have a Medicaid home and community-based waiver, you have a federal entitlement, which means if there's a delay in services, anything you're talking about with GT independence, if there's a delay in services, or if there's a termination of services, you have a right to file for a due process hearing. And you do it immediately. Don't waste time. Don't go through the administrative appeal process, which is talk to the SSA, talk to the SSA director, talk to the superintendent, talk to Kim. We've got that on the Arc of Ohio under resources. You call a number, make sure you have your loved one's social security number, and you say what was delayed, what was terminated, what did they say no on, and a hearing would be held. Yeah, part of this is learning our rights, and so yeah, let's move on.
well, I think we're
Okay.
pretty much, do you want to do the video?
Well, we want to talk about,
Okay.
So, to further the civics lessons, this video is something you may have seen. I saw it when I was 10, but it's still valid. It talks about how a bill becomes a law on a federal level, but it's the same process. I know I see some smiles. It's the same process
Schoolhouse Rock,
on
yes.
the state level.
Let me sing
We're
that.
talking about House Bill 33, which is the budget bill. It's developed by the governor's office. He then submits it to the House of Representatives. It gets debated. It then goes over to the Senate, and it gets debated. And then the House and the Senate work out a compromise, and then it goes back to those houses, both houses, the House of Representatives, the Senate. If they reach an agreement, it then goes to the governor. You'll see this on a federal level. In most bills, the governor goes up or down in a veto. In the budget bill, by Ohio law, he has line item veto authority.
I know, it's old Schoolhouse Rock.
Hey, Bill, you certainly have a lot of patience and courage.
Well, I got this far. When I started, I wasn't even a bill. I was just an idea. Some folks back home decided they wanted a law class, so they called a local congressman, and he said, "You're right, there ought to be a law." And he sat down and wrote me out and introduced me to Congress, and I became a bill. And I'll remain a bill until they decide to make me a law. I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I got as far as Capitol Hill. Well, now I'm stuck in committee, and I sit here and wait while a few key congressmen discuss and debate whether they should let me be a law. I hope and pray that they will, but today I'm still just a bill.
Listen to those congressmen arguing. Is all that discussion and debate about you?
Yeah, I'm one of the lucky ones. Most bills never even get this far. I hope they decide to report on me favorably, otherwise I may die.
Die?
Yeah, die in committee. Oh, but it looks like I'm gonna live. Now I go to the House of Representatives and they vote on me.
If they vote yes, what
Then
happens?
I go to the Senate and the whole thing starts all today I'm still just a bill.
You mean even if the whole Congress says you should be a law, the president can still say no?
Yes, that's called a veto. If the president vetoes me, I have to go back to Congress and they vote on me again, and by that time it's over.
By that time, it's very unlikely that you become a law. It's not easy to become a law, is it?
No, but I hope and pray that I will. But today I'm still just a bill. He signed your bill, now you're a law. Oh yeah!
So we're talking about a bill. It's called House Bill 33. So if you don't remember any numbers today, we're talking about House Bill 33. That's the budget bill. It's currently in the House of Representatives and in the House Finance Committee. So the House Finance Committee is hearing testimony. They're hearing testimony all this week. I'm testifying on Tuesday of next week. We'll need people to testify in the Senate next month. So how that works, and I know Mary Ann over here has volunteered already from Cuyahoga. If anyone else wants to testify and help tell their story, I believe that our families need to just tell their story. And you have to tell it in 3 to 5 minutes. That's hard. I mean, I know most of you moms are used to describing it back to your second trimester. We don't need to go back that far. We just need you to explain and be very succinct. This is about, I can't find employees, I can't find providers because the wages are too low. And we have to increase funding by 50%. The governor, as a reminder, has recommended a 16.5% in residential and a 10% in day services. That's great, but we need 50.
I think, and this is where it gets a little tough for us when we talk about telling your story, because it is your story, right? But you have to go in there and not let them get you sidetracked onto other things. So if you go in there and you talk about things like providers are bad, blah, 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 they're going to go down a path of regulatory reform, and they're not going to want to offer that money that we need. So you have to stay focused on the DSP wage crisis and the 50% increase we need. I can't tell you exactly how to tell your story because it is your story, but I would just advise you to kind of stay on task if you can, because if you go down the path of talking about past grievances or those kind of things, even though those are real, right? Any opportunity that you give them to kind of go a different path and it's not about funding, they will.
So it's not about my county won't do this,
right,
or my provider's sending me lousy staff, or I've got a problem with GT, independence. It's about people supporting our loved ones have to be paid more. 44% of our direct support staff are on government benefits. 44% are getting food stamps and Medicaid themselves. And have to understand, they're looking at it from a money perspective. And many of them are business people. And what they're saying is, I can't find anyone at $30 an hour. Why will 20 help? Don't get into a debate with them. Just acknowledge them that there is a moral imperative. Throw out whatever you do to the least of these. Throw out whatever you can in that dialogue, but don't condemn the system. Why would I throw money at the Titanic?
Right.
Why would I promote something that people are testifying are bad? We are going in hand together to say, we support 100,000 people in this system and we're doing, a piss poor job at funding it. So I shouldn't quote the Bible and say that at the same time, should I? But my family is from Appalachia, we get away with that.
So I'm going to add one more piece to that, and that is, I think this is on. There we go. Remember earlier, OhioDDCrisis.com, and when you go to that website and you put in your story, it also connects you to what is called voter voice. So we are capturing all these stories. So in the last round of testimony, we submitted about 100 written testimonies from families. We need those stories to drive this increase.
The legislators are saying, won't $18 be enough?
Right.
And our answer has been no.
We can't.
So think of us as the union for people with disabilities and families. This is a negotiating This is negotiated, but we're not doing it by attacking. We're not doing it by condemning. We're not doing it by attacking anyone. We're saying this is the moral thing to do. We have 100,000 people we are currently serving, and we know that there are many, many more people on their way that we don't even know about. And 44% of the people we employ now are on government benefits themselves. So let's open it up for some discussion.
Okay.
Yes.
Can you have our mics up here?
Who am I going to?
I think Becky's been waiting.
I'm all right. So I know this is going to put a burden on you, but if we want to testify, can we send you what we're going to testify and you read over it and say, this is what, you know me, I have a hard time editing myself. So
We'll help, yeah.
You will
So
sit down.
the actual process is, we're going to be, Facebook is one of the easiest ways, either through Becky and Janet's platform, or we'll post it on the Arc of Ohio Facebook of when hearings take place. The new process is that they want you to have written testimony, and I know that's challenging for some, that you submit your written testimony to the chair of the committee. So next month it'll be the Senate Finance Subcommittee on Human Services.
If you go to OhioDDCrisis.com and tell your story, then we behind the scenes can capture that and look at it. If you want to send it to us personally, I'm happy to do that. And Mary Ann, I'm going to just mention your name because you and I went back and forth on it. Again, we can provide that guidance, but it's still your story, and I don't want to change your story necessarily. I want to guide you guys.
So you submit your written story 24 hours ahead of time. You don't have to read it. In fact, it's hard for me without my readers to read it. You know, I'm looking up and I don't do bifocals very well. You don't have to read it, but they want it because that becomes part of the public record. And you have to do it 24 hours in advance to the chair of the committee, will help you with that. And they give you an approximate time when you would testify. It's usually between 10 and 2 o'clock, but it doesn't have to be. And when you go there, they will have your name. They might give you an estimate. If you tell them in advance, I've got a disability and I can't really sit here very long, or I just came from Toledo and I can't stay here all day, they will move you up. They will call your name, and there is actually a podium. What freaks many people out is there is also a camera, and you will be live streamed. That makes people nervous. It makes me nervous sometimes. You've seen me, I get emotional just standing here, but that's okay. Emotion shows passion, and they relate to that. Most of the people that you'll be talking to are also parents. They don't happen to have always children with disabilities, but sometimes they do. And 1 in 7 of them have a relationship somewhere in their family. They will relate. Talk about your story, but focus on wages. That the reason this doesn't happen is because my staff don't have the funds to do things. And tell your personal story. Sarah here is telling me her stories of people that ghosted her. They just didn't show up when she needed to do things, and she's got a job in the real world. I need a body to take me there. Or if you're a parent that lost your job because you didn't have staff to support you, or if you were doing shared living and you need a break, the legislature doesn't write the rules on shared living. That's Kim's job, the lady this morning. They only provide the funding. Now, occasionally they write laws that will do other things, and they may ask you, well, what else can we do other than give you money? So a legislator the other day said, what if we increase the number of people that are allowed in a bedroom in a group home? I had the same reaction. Or what if we decrease the number of bathrooms in an ICF? For me, at my age, that's how we started to have 1,000 people in a facility built for 100. You know, I don't want to go down that slippery slope. As a former behaviorist, redirect. This is about my kid. And no, the bottom line is people need to be paid more. And our staff are the salt of the earth. And they deserve a fair wage. And we're recommending, and this is where it gets tough for independents, we're recommending an average of $20 an hour. Understanding that your rate, it's a base rate of 20 plus building on. So we're hoping to get to a 50% increase. But try not to go there when, you know, if you're making 22 as an independent, that's not really a real rate, because you have to pay whatever you have to pay on top of that. Yes.
I just want to add a couple things. I think as we've talked about many budget cycles over the years and realized some of our errors and some of the ways we've talked about things, I think we have to do a better job of supporting each other and our whole system as we talk about these things. What I mean by that is you don't want to get into those debates at the legislature about, well, my agency provider sucks, and that's why I have independence, and those kind of things, or you know, the whole ICF funding and all those things. I believe it's our job, responsibility to empower and educate people so that they can make the best decision for themselves.
So if you're an agency provider and you're not making it anymore, or even as an independent, tell them. We have an agency provider in Northwest Ohio that closed 11 group homes during the pandemic. They went home. So if you're one of those families that the child that killed you to place to begin with is now back at home, and often they're back at home being a shared living setting, and mom or dad lost their job, that's a good story. Tell your story. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, because you know what, when you do that, if you don't stay positive and you're trying to bring a point, you lose people. You know, they're not really interested in hearing like complaints that you're going to complain about this worker. You know, you're fighting for the, you know, the cause. You're telling them how we need more help. They're not interested in you talking about Janet over there.
Yeah, you got to stay on task with them.
Thank you. Stay positive. Thank them for their time, even though it's you that just spent 3 hours on the road. Thank them for their time. They want to help. We have term limits, which sounds like a good thing, that you only can be in the legislature so long. There's not time enough for them to understand the process. I tease some of them that it takes 3 years to figure out where the men's room is, let alone how to do parliamentary procedure. You know, they don't know. This is new for them too. It's a huge budget, and they don't necessarily know where all the funding comes from. Yeah.
I think we got this one first, and then Eric.
Okay.
Hi, I'm actually here. I'm an agency provider with the Oregon, Ohio, and I'm here with my clients' parents that I've worked with for a long time. And I just wanted to add that I think it's super important that we become united, because we can't have our jobs without their children, and they can't have the services without us. So there are some of us who actually like the families that we work with. It's not all wars and, oh, you know, I've been with all my clients for 3 or 4 years, and I've almost quit several times because I can't pay my bills.
Right.
You know, I was an independent, and that was so much stress because you get audited all the time, and you don't know half the rules because it's extremely complicated, and I have a college degree. And it's still really hard for me. So my mom, being an independent who's been a homemaker her whole life, is just not even possible for some people.
Right.
So anyways, I just really wanted to express what you were saying. We can't go in as a provider, an independent, also an agency worker, and I get frustrated with the county boards because I feel like I'm doing all the work and they're sitting at their desk making twice as much as me. And I get frustrated and I want to point my fingers at the county board, but I can't do that when I'm in there. And the families can't point their fingers at the county boards or the workers, because if we don't come in united and we just sit there and gossip and say all of our hardships instead of this is the problem, there are good workers out there who love their jobs, who want to stay with your families for the long term, and we don't unite together, we're not going to get anywhere. So I just wanted to add my 2 cents because I love my clients, I love the families I've served, and I've been with them for a long time, and I hope some of you have relationships with providers that are good. Otherwise, there's really no point to this conference. So.
No, good point.
I just wanted to say I found it very helpful that to run my testimony asked you first before.
Okay, good.
And
I did my best.
My daughter and my 4-year-old granddaughter went to give testimony, okay? My 4-year-old brought her little stuffed animal. But at any rate, it's really important. I've learned after talking to some of the legislators, they really don't all know what's going on.
Right.
So please get out there and tell your story. If you can't go in person, which I think is really important, then write your testimony. But if you can go in person, it's great. I travel from the Cleveland area because I want to build these relationships. Please say something. Please open your mouths. I'm sorry.
And
I think, thank you for that. It's petals, right? Did I get that right? Petals, yeah. So actually, Carruthers was very impressed, receptive to your granddaughter. So that was pretty awesome.
So bring your loved ones with you.
Stop for 1 second. So I just want to point this out, and I think this is one of the most important things that we talk about is let's get back to the basics of, I think we all believe in, I truly believe that people want to do good things, and I believe, or we believe, that it's, when you get right down to it, Sarah should be driving the conversation, right? It's about Sarah. She should get to pick who provides that care. So that's the core value and mission of even when we talk about our family choice program, right? Is people should be able to pick who provides that care to them. And then we all have to do better supporting all of us, each other in the system. Okay? You want the mic again?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Sanjay. That's my wife Kalpana. We come from Cuyahoga County, parents of 2 children with disabilities. I have 2-fold questions. One is, we are talking about rate increase. How does Ohio stack among all other states? Are we at the low end? Are we in the middle? So I think that's something that they may ask or they may want to know,
right,
compared to other states.
We're about in the middle currently, but other states have already raised their rate. So if you asked me that question last year, we were in the middle, but other state legislators have already started to increase their rate.
So remember,
we're behind now.
Yeah, remember other states have different budget cycles. So if you look at like Minnesota, I think they got a 40% increase in rate. So I think this is not just an Ohio problem, it's a nationwide problem. And I think we also have to address the inequities of care as we talk about these things. And, so yes, that's just
so that's one thing is, if we really want to see who we are benchmarking against, right? Some of the top paying states, I guess. The second thing is, we talk about not finding enough providers. Now, some of us are already, in the shared living, where we are kind of default providers.
Right.
Whether they give us $50 or $500, we stay with our kids. So, how do you make a case for kind of paying more to ourselves, if you will? We don't get the reason why we are forced into this is because we can't find a reliable third-party provider. So even we leave our own jobs to do this service. So I guess, how do you make case for paying yourself more?
Well, so it's a multi-pronged approach. So our target until June 30th is just to get the funding to raise the rate. And we try not to talk about that yet. So the state law, House Bill 33, which will become state law, will provide the funding. And then our job starts all over again with Kim and her staff. So every law has an administrative rule under it on how are we going to spend the money. So that argument will begin in July, and that discussion will begin in July. So first, we have to be single focused. We need a 50% increase in funding so we can raise the rates. And then the Department of Developmental Disability determines the rate structure. So Clay, who is up here, will be leading. He leads the team on doing the behind-the-scenes math. And Alan, who is up here, writes the rules, and Kim is in charge of making sure all of that happens. So the first step is to get the money. The second step is how are we going to spend the money? And that's where we will be discussing the rules on who gets paid and how much they get paid. The understanding was always that once your son or daughter is at least 18, you no longer have a legal responsibility. They get that. And if they get it that if your children were not living with you, they'd be a lot more expensive. So we have a good argument. But it's going to take us up to 3 years to redo the rate structure. We'll do what we can between July and December to get that 50% rate in there. But it's going to take another couple years to restructure the whole system. The first step, one of the first steps is we have always believed we need one waiver and a valid instrument to determine how much each person gets in that waiver. The system, the administration agreed several years ago before the pandemic that we'll combine level 1 and self. So you'll see that the reason so many things are similar now between level 1 and self is that once the pandemic gets faded away, we'll combine those two waivers and just have the IO waiver and whatever this other one's going to be called. The agreement from the very beginning is no one will lose any services. But that's the reason level 1 and self are so similar now, so that we can just mush them together. We will then work on the developmental disability profile that determines your funding within the IO waiver and the acuity assessment that determines the funding in your day service. The goal, my goal, is to make the IO waiver one budget and a valid instrument, not the DDP, to determine my funding range. Yes, ma'am.
Gary, can you make sure that when the new DDP, that it is brought to the light?
Yes.
Because that is my biggest pressure. It goes into this lovely algorithm that nobody knows what the hell is going on.
You're okay. So
you're good.
I've been in Ohio 26 years now. About 25 years ago, our levies started to fail. And we didn't have local money. But 25 years ago, Ohio ranked 47th in the use of federal money for people with disabilities, because we had our local levies. And most people getting services were getting them by county board funding. But levies were failing. So we went to the state legislature 25 years ago and said, we need help. They had no help to give us. Ohio was beginning to go into sort of a depression. a recession. They don't like that word. So what we did was we created the waivers we know today. And we refinanced the DD system. So we took people that were 100% funded by local dollars, put them on a waiver, and now there's 60% federal money. What the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services on a federal level said, okay, this is a deal between Ohio and Washington, not counties. And it's real nice you have local levies, but we don't really care. And there has to be a fair way to determine how much money everyone gets. New York had something called the Developmental Disability Profile, and Ohio borrowed it and bastardized it over 40 times to meet its funding that they had. It's not a valid instrument. The acuity assessment was something used in Clark County, and we borrowed that and fit the funding we had available. And it kind of worked for 20 years. It doesn't work anymore. And there is a penalty if you live at home with your family and your family is your provider. I can't talk to anyone in the system that believes it needs to continue. But there are validated national instruments already out there that we'll have to adopt. And it has to be run through, okay, how much money do we have? What can we spend? And we got another, okay.
Let me just,
yes,
I'm gonna get your question, and then they're ready for us downstairs. I just want to follow up a little bit about that, and I think it's a very valid point, right? A very valid question. But when you're having those conversations with where the funding comes from, try to stay focused on what the needs are of the person being served. And I think that will help you. Eventually we'll get to those funding ranges and those kind of things with the work that the contractor Deloitte's going to do with the state, because we're going to look at all of that stuff and try to redesign our system. So try to stay focused on those conversations about the needs of, is it your son?
Yeah.
Yes.
And we'll be hosting those forums for the department where you can come in and give your input.
And you don't have a mic, so you got to stop for a minute. Well, we got one more question, and then they're ready for us downstairs.
Just real quick, when it comes to DSP rate, a lot of our staff qualify for a lot of different government benefits right now.
Yes.
With that 12, 13, even if they get to 16, still probably, if we were to get that 50%, we would get them to $20 an hour. Has there been any research done as far as would it take away from that, and would that sway their decision in making?
Yeah, it's a valid point. Gary and I have this conversation often about where is the breaking point, right? So if we got almost 50% of our staff getting Medicaid services, and I as an agency offer them 16, 17 bucks an hour, but they lose their benefits, I'm then in a situation where it's harming them. So where's that number at? I don't know. Is it 25 bucks an hour? But we have those discussions all the time about, you know, where's the, I hate to say cutoff point, but there is, we just gotta think through all those things.
We're going down to the congressional room on the first floor. It's the congressional room. Pretend you're my grandma's. If you see someone with a gold pin or looks like someone you haven't seen all day, be welcoming. And I don't care if you're from their district or not. They don't know. Tell them your story and take them to the bar. Get them a drink. Offer a meatball. You know.
And thank you guys for everything.
Thank you.
The goal is to get them to come on together. You do that?
Get a picture with Gary. Get a picture with Gary.
There's info in the chair.